Welcome back to our explainer series on the book Perverting Our Reproductive Nature. Today, we're diving straight into Chapter 12, titled IVF, Surrogacy, Artificial Wombs, and CRISPR. We're going to impartially examine the author's incredibly compelling analysis of how modern biotechnology is quite literally reshaping human reproduction. We've got some really profound cultural arguments to break down step by step.
So let's just jump right in with a massive foundational question that the text poses right out of the gate. What happens to society when the creation of life transitions from being a relational gift rooted in intimacy to a commercial product that you can just engineer and purchase?
To unpack the author's answer to that question, we're going to trace the chronological argument across 5 distinct technological dominoes. First up is IVF, then surrogacy, third, artificial wombs, fourth, CRISPR, and finally, the author's proposed solution, reclaiming the sacred. Now, to understand how we actually arrived at this crazy technological crossroad, the author connects this chapter right back to the previous ones, showing this super clear cultural progression. Think about it. It began by separating sex from consequence through birth control. Then it moved to separating sex from relationship via pornography and dating apps. And now we've arrived at separating conception from intimacy entirely. It's a really powerful way to see how these cultural shifts just keep building upon each other. Okay, Section 1. The first domino, IVF. The author absolutely acknowledges the profound compassion that IVF brings to infertile couples, even calling it a miracle for the brokenhearted. But they argue it also cracked open the door to a massive global industry. We're talking about a global IVF market projected to hit a staggering $43 billion by 2022. The text raises a really uncomfortable question here. When treating infertility becomes this profitable, does fertility simply become a business? Against a backdrop of a rising global infertility, where male sperm counts have literally dropped 50% in the last 50 years, the book argues that reproduction has completely transformed into a monetized marketplace. Leftover embryos are sold or discarded, and for prospective parents, you can now literally browse egg donor catalogs, filtering human beings by traits like IQ, athletic ability, and eye color. It's kind of like adding items to an online shopping cart. Which brings us to Section 2, and the second domino in the author's timeline, gestational surrogacy. The text points out a fascinating, deep tension between marketing and reality here. The fertility industry routinely frames surrogacy as pure compassion and female empowerment, but the author critiques it as a system fundamentally built on commerce, legal loopholes, and frankly, the financial exploitation of vulnerable women. They argue that true, uncoerced consent is incredibly difficult to achieve when a surrogate's actual financial survival might depend on that paycheck. So the real crux of the author's argument here is that surrogacy contracts treat the deepest, most primal biological bonds between mother and child as just manageable obstacles in a business transaction. The critique is that surrogacy reduces the womb to rentable real estate. If a baby has an undesired trait or if the intended parents just change their minds, contracts are sometimes terminated. It turns what was supposed to be a gesture of hope into a legal struggle over ownership. Next up, Section 3. Artificial wombs and dependency. The author draws this chilling chronological parallel here. Back in 1932, Aldous Huxley warned of artificial hatcheries in his dystopian novel Brave New World. Fast forward to 2017, and researchers at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia actually grew premature lambs in synthetic sacs filled with artificial amniotic fluid. And now, future human trials are being openly discussed as a way to potentially eliminate the risks and the biology of pregnancy altogether. By pulling in Huxley's famous quote about decanting babies, the book really emphasizes the existential stakes of severing human life from maternal touch. The author uses this to ask us a super profound question. What does it actually mean for a human being to be brought into the world without ever once feeling the rhythm of a mother's heartbeat or the warmth of a womb? The text forcefully argues that human dependency is a designed feature of love. It is not a biological flaw that we need to eliminate with technology. The sheer helplessness of an infant and the sacrifice of a mother are what forge our absolute deepest human bonds. The author warns that a culture that eliminates the physical dependency of an infant on its mother doesn't transcend human nature. Rather, it just loses it completely.
This leads us to Section 4, CRISPR and editing the blueprint.
The text warns that we are on a real slippery slope where editing the human blueprint could escalate so quickly. On one hand, you have parents designing for shallow cosmetic preferences, right? Selecting for IQ or athletic ability. But on the other side, the author warns of the terrifying potential for governments to engineer populations for control, editing for pain tolerance, docility, suppressing dissent. In either scenario, reproduction shifts completely away from receiving a natural gift into the cold, calculated act of manufacturing a product. To drive this home, the author anchors this warning in C.S. Lewis's profound observation from The Abolition of Man. Lewis pointed out that when humans are engineered for specific functions, they cease to be mysterious beings and instead become manufactured products. And products, as the author notes, are not loved unconditionally. They are simply used for a purpose. Finally, we reach Section 5, the author's proposed solution, reclaiming the sacred. Okay, to really grasp the author's conclusion, we have to revisit their core definition of perversion, which is foundational to this entire book. Perversion is defined as using a thing in direct opposition to its original purpose, or the designer's intent. The central argument here is that by turning reproduction into this commercial engineered process, society is quite literally perverting its original relational design. So the author is basically urging a massive cultural pivot. We need to move away from viewing reproduction as a commodity that is transactional, engineered, and driven by contracts. Instead, we have to return to treating it as a covenant, which is relational, naturally designed, and rooted deeply in unconditional love. Creating life is a sacred mystery, and the argument is that it shouldn't be outsourced to a laboratory. As this chapter forcefully advances the book's overarching thesis about the dangers of abandoning our biological design, the stakes are clearly getting much higher. We've moved from simply altering our behaviors in previous chapters to literally altering our very biology. So we're left with a highly provocative thought as we look toward the later chapters of the book. As we engineer life for convenience and control, are we transcending our human nature, or are we abolishing it? You can dive much deeper into these fascinating concepts and support the author by checking out the interactive companion site at pervertingourreproductivenature.com.